Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Michael Davis from Mira Scriptura, and today we're going to be looking at what I'm going to call importing terminology. It's a type of wordplay, and I think it's kind of similar to the metaphorical logic that I talked about in one of my earlier videos. Although the metaphorical logic is I think, used mostly in terms of the Gospels. Today, with the importing terminology, I think it's pretty much just used primarily in the epistles, and maybe even just Paul. I haven't looked at the non-Pauline epistles yet. So today we're going to look at Galatians. And so what I mean by importing terminology is what Paul does is he takes terms from another argument, and then he uses those terms in a different argument. So there's kind of a double layered meaning there that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on. But if you're not really familiar with what the other argument was. So I think one of the more obvious ones is when Paul talks about slaves. I think it's pretty obvious that there was an issue with slaves in the New Testament church, and that somehow slaves were kind of had a lesser standing in the kingdom of God, and so Paul and other New Testament writers are really writing against that. So here, if we look in Galatians, we're going to be looking at the purple highlighting first. So if you look in Galatians here, where it says Paul is talking about how he's a slave of Christ, and so this is metaphor for him, for his relationship with Christ, or how he relates to Christ. But it's also the term slave is from another argument, namely the one where slaves had a lesser standing in the kingdom of God. And so by Paul calling himself a slave, even if it is a slave of Christ, he's relating more to the actual slaves that were in the church at that time. So he's kind of putting himself on him and the slaves on equal footing by using this terminology. And so we see this throughout the letter, and I haven't highlighted all of them here, just a few. So he's talking about false teachers and how they would enslave them, and again, using terminology from another argument, but using it against the false teachers, kind of in a different context here. And then if we scroll down further here, again talking about their false teachings, and how Christ has set them free, and how they're not to be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Again, those terminology from the slave standing in the kingdom of God argument. He's importing those terms and using them in a different context to solidify his position on the slave issue. And I think that's it for the Galatians there. Okay, so another one is this whole issue of childbirth in the New Testament, and there seems to be some issue with childbirth. There's some theological, probably eschatological issue here that's happening in terms of one's standing in the kingdom of God was determined by birth. And so we have this terminology used from birth. And so here in the yellow highlights, Paul talks about himself being set apart from his mother's womb. Again, Paul talks about Jesus being born of a woman. Now, most commentators are just going to say that's just proving Jesus's humanity, but it may be something deeper. There may be a deeper argument that Paul is addressing there. We'll skip these two for now, but the analogies or the allegorical readings that he uses are related to childbirth. The children being born to the slave woman and the free woman. And the Old Testament verse he quotes talks about childbirth. Okay, so there's this birthing theme, this birthing issue that seems to be happening in the New Testament church at the time. And so there's two phrases here that Paul uses where he says, I'm afraid for you, lest perhaps I have labored for you in vain. Now, he may just be talking about his labors, or maybe he may be using the term in terms of childbirth labor. And so he's importing that term into his relationship with the Galatians. And again, down here where he calls them his children, for whom he's had birth pains again. Again, using the terminology from the birthing issue, and he's importing it into how he relates to the Galatians. So I hope that's clear. I hope that's not too confusing. Still trying to articulate and discovering how Paul uses this, but I hope that gives you at least somewhat of an idea of how Paul is importing terms from one argument into another argument. I thought about calling it cross-pollination wordplay, but I'm just going to refer to it as importing terms. So hope that helps. Hope you like that. Thanks for watching.